So I often get asked, what kind of credit score do I need in order to accept a tenant? And after screening thousands of applications, I can tell you that the answer isn't what you think. Let me show you the actual data. My name is Sue Richey, and I'm the owner of a residential property management company here in Northern Virginia. Now, you've probably seen blogs or articles saying things like, look for a 650 or higher credit score, or we only rent to people over a 700 score with a hard cutoff. Really? That advice probably comes from people who've never actually maybe screened a tenant. And in our company, Richey Property Management, we have reviewed, like I said, thousands of applications. And what I've learned is that a credit score does matter, of course, but it's not the whole picture. So let me help you make better decisions with real information and not just generic advice. I'm going to show you what the data actually says from real applications that we've processed and approved, and how that can help you make smarter screening decisions that protect your investment without turning away good tenants. Okay, so let's break down credit scores tier by tier. But before we do that, I want to just explain and define exactly what a credit score is and what it measures. So basically, it's going to show you someone's history of paying their debts on time and their overall likelihood of paying their rent on time for you. Now, it's obviously important to landlords because it's going to show how likely that tenant is to pay their rent in a timely manner and if they've had a history of doing so consistently. Okay, so let's get into the tiers themselves. Our first tier is what we're going to call the excellent category, and I'd say this is about 750 to 850. Generally speaking, these tenants pay their rent on time, and our approval rate for these tenants is about 95% of tenants who fall within this credit score range. But just because it's a great credit score, that generally gives us the green light, but we definitely want to go ahead and verify the other things like their rental history and their income verification. And remember, a great credit score doesn't replace good screening and the other pieces of the background check. In our company, we have a lot of potential tenants who fall into this range, and so it's generally an easy approval process. Now, the next tier, we're going to call it the very good category, and this would be somewhere roughly between 700 and 750. And these people have generally good track record. They don't have many issues, and the approval, right here is around probably 90%. And this is a very common range and kind of a sweet spot for most of our applications that we see. And if someone falls within this range and they check all the other boxes, then you're going to be in great shape. Okay, now the good category is the next tier, and that's somewhere between about 650 and 700. These people are generally responsible, but maybe they've had a bump in the road. So our approval process for these people is probably in the 70 to 75% range. But you'd need to dig a little deeper to understand why the credit score isn't higher. Obviously life happens and people may have gone through a tough time. We saw a lot of this actually when the real estate market crashed back in 2008, 2009. We would see people with a great credit score for years and years and years. And then there was this blip. Maybe they lost their job. They lost their home. There's a whole bunch of reasons why this could happen. And that was a very different picture than somebody who consistently paid late over time. So during that time when the real estate market crashed and again, the financial markets crashed, it was a pattern. We could see that the people's scores went down and they were affected, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they would be a bad tenant. Those were very unusual circumstances and very difficult times, and we looked at that very differently than, again, someone who consistently didn't pay their bills on time, didn't pay their rent on time. In the past, we have approved tenants with credit scores in the 680 range because it turned out that they had an incident like this or something that affected their ability to pay for a finite time, but later they got back on their feet and they were okay. These kinds of tenants, when we put them in the property and we looked at the whole picture, I know of several success stories like that where they were fine and they paid their rent on time and they were really, really good tenants. Okay, so the next category is what we call fair, okay? This is about 600 to 650, and this one is definitely a case-by-case type of situation here for approval. Our approval rate here is probably in the 40% range here. When we see a score that's, say, in around the 620 range, it's definitely worth looking at the full picture. Now, the income the references and whatever explanation there might be, but don't get swayed by an explanation that might not actually be true. You want to verify some of these things as well. I remember a situation, we had a tenant who went through a very difficult time with their business went under, and they eventually got themselves back on their feet, but during that time their credit score really tanked, and they were willing to pay a full year of rent up front because they had started a new business, they were now making a lot of money, and so their income was definitely able to support the rent, but they had this bad credit because of, again, a failing business. But we worked it out, and they were great tenants, and they stayed in that property for years and years, and it worked out just fine. So again, you got to look at the whole picture. Okay, and then the last tier is the tier that is the lowest, and it is what we call, it has a poor rating. And this is really under 600. And this is when you really have to think twice about whether you want to even consider this applicant or just simply move on and keep looking. And we probably approve very, very few of these, maybe 10%, 15%. If we do end up approving an applicant like this, it's oftentimes because the owner will insist that they want to take an applicant even though we recommend maybe not to. Might be because the market is slow and they're just wanting to get someone in there. We don't recommend that for a lot of reasons, but that's often why we would approve somebody in a poor category. Now remember, it's not always necessarily a full no, because someone might have a very strong cosigner, for example, or they're offering to prepay a significant portion of the rent or the full year, for example, like we had before. And then in that case, you'd want to maybe consider it, but keep in mind that this person, if they're in a poor category, they've had a pattern of not paying for a long period of time. So the bottom line is that every number tells a story, and your job as a landlord, just like ours, is to understand that story before making a decision. Okay, so the truth is that the credit score is really just the starting point, and that's the bare minimum here. Somebody really needs to do the other things that matter even more than just looking at the credit score. So first you want to look at income and verify that. And a tenant with a credit score of 650 or 675 with credit score, but they have solid income, could be a better tenant than somebody who has a 750s credit score but is barely making the 3 times rent income qualification, because they're not going to be very comfortable with paying that rent. And just because they have a good credit score, things might be really tight and they might not be able to pay. Both of these things matter, and a credit score can be a good gatekeeper, but a solid income can definitely help overcome a lower credit score sometimes. Okay, next is the rental history. As I've mentioned in previous videos, always call the previous landlord. Someone may have messed up their credit card payments or done something in the past that affected their score, but maybe they never missed rent, and that's going to be important to know. So the next thing is to understand that why the score dropped. Was it because of a divorce? Did they have some kind of medical event that then put them in debt? There can be all sorts of things. So there is one sort of event that's, again, very different from someone who has habitually skipped payments, just because they didn't feel like paying. And ask for an explanation for those folks who are under 680, for example. And lastly, you want to look at the local market factors. In Northern Virginia, the median renter credit score is around 670 to 690. And if your bar is at 750, you may eliminate, 70% of really good qualified applicants because you're looking for that perfect credit score. You want to be looking for someone reliable. And this is why we don't have a hard cutoff credit score in our company like other management companies do. But that's because we try to really look at that whole picture and the situation. It's really about avoiding the mistake of being too strict or too lenient. And it's really trying to evaluate smartly. So let's talk local here for a second. In areas like Arlington, Virginia and Reston, Virginia, we often see higher incomes, higher credit scores, and you're going to see generally professionals and government employees who come to rent here. And in areas like Woodbridge, for example, or Manassas, there is a higher military population, military families. They make great tenants, but there is a variety of their credit scores vary more. So understanding too your local market and even your hyper local market is way more valuable than following some national rule about what the right credit score is to approve a tenant. That is what's going to set smart landlords apart. You're going to know your area, you know your tenant pool, and you know how to evaluate fairly. Okay, so let's change gears here for a minute and touch on a few common mistakes that I see landlords make all the time when it comes to credit score. Mistake number one is, again, setting that bar too high. I see landlords say, I will only accept 720 plus and the property sits on the market for 2 months. That lost rent can cost more than a slightly lower credit score will if you do all the other things that we talked about when screening an applicant. Okay, mistake number two, only looking at this number. Remember, credit score is just one data point and it's not the full picture. So take the time to do all the other screening. Mistake number three is being inconsistent with your criteria. And when you're a landlord, you have to apply the same standards to everyone, and that's a fair housing rule. So make sure that you write down and document your screening criteria before you ever start. And lastly is ignoring the explanation. I've seen this over and over because sometimes there is a legitimate reason behind that lower credit score, and sometimes that reason can change everything. So take the time to understand and listen to the explanation and take it into consideration. Okay, so the bottom line is, what kind of credit score do you actually need? In Northern Virginia, we are comfortable with the excellent, the good, and the very good range. And sometimes we've approved applicants with lower credit scores and we've rejected applicants with much higher credit scores because it isn't just about this one number at our company. And we really try to look at the whole picture, verify the income. We look at the employment, we look at their past rental history, and we look at references, and we look at criminal background check as well. And when all these things line up, then you found your next great tenant. So if you are a DIY landlord and you want to master this process, then I encourage you to check out my course on how to get great tenants and avoid the bad ones. It includes our full screening checklist, all the questions we ask, and exactly how we evaluate each part of an application. And you'll find the link for that in the description below. And if you're thinking, so that's a lot of work and I don't really want to do all this, then I definitely get it. That's why we offer full service property management here in Northern Virginia. And we can also just lease your property if you want us to find a great tenant, and you can do the management after that on your own. Either way, it's fine with us. If you want to learn more, you can check us out at richeypm.com, and that link is in the description below as well. So thank you so much for watching. If you have questions about credit scores, then drop them in the comments below. I love hearing from other landlords and happy to help if I can. And don't forget to subscribe. And I share a lot of practical tips here for landlords here in Northern Virginia and beyond. Thanks again. Take care.